Poinsettia, Chapter 3. Within the large conference hall, a group of men gathered. These were the members of the Board of Trustees, people who looked after St. Raphael's Children's Home and Hospital. It was a long table and wide, rather rectangular. Off came the bowlers, caps, derbies, and top hats as the men took their respective seats, ready to discuss all manners of business. At the head of the table were two seats. One was resided by an elderly man with a dark graying mustache, bushy eyebrows, and ragged hair. He was dressed in an old-fashioned suit and a tight cravat, hands folded before him. His absent gray eyes watched the others. Beside him, an empty seat remained. "Will we be waiting for him?" one of the members asked. "Did he not return recently? Will he not preside over us?" "You know Lord McIntyre," from another member. "He is notorious for simply coming and going as he pleases. Sometimes I wonder why he even bothers. It's not like he does much of anything on this board anyway, except miss the meetings. He's been outlandish that way as of late. At this time of year, who takes a vacation to India when there's work to be done?" "I'm perfectly capable," said the man at the head of the table. "Indeed, Mr. McLaughlin does more for this board than the president." "Mr. McLaughlin," came the voice at the foot of the table, "could we please settle this matter now? Will Lord McIntyre be joining us this evening?" "Sit yourself down, Lord McCairn," Mr. McLaughlin ordered. "We needn't make a fuss over this matter. He has only arrived home recently, and I'm sure he wants a good long rest after his travels. We shall continue without him tonight." "Very good, then," Lord McCairn said as he sat down. Mr. McLaughlin looked over a few documents before him. "Now, let's call ourselves to order, then. Shall we go over the minutes of our last meeting?" Mr. Borders, to the right, stood up and looked over the documents he had noted the previous meeting and began to recite them. The doors opened meanwhile, and in came a bearded man, approaching Mr. McLaughlin and whispering in his ear. "Is that so?" he replied softly. He waited until Mr. Borders was finished and seated before holding his hands before him again. "It seems we have a visitor this evening. Go on, Mr. Kieran, and show the old biddy in." "Visitor? Everyone knows these meetings are strictly private," Lord McCairn argued. "We have a duty to listen to the members of the hospital, McCairn. Let the old crow say her piece, and we can go on with our scheduled business." The young man scuttled back out into the lobby and came back moments later to open the door for an older woman. She had to be in her 60s, and a nun as well. Adorned in her habit, making her appear more like a giant penguin, she seemed to float forward like a ghost. She was tall and scrawny, but with a face that frightened young Catholic schoolchildren when it was vexed. "Sister Bernadette, I presume, head nurse and caregiver of the St. Raphael's Children's Hospital?" Mr. McLaughlin asked. "That I am, sir," she said with a little curtsy, or something that was supposed to resemble one. The man almost expected her to topple over like an old off-balance tree. "What can we do for you? We are quite busy." "Sir, I have to inquire about a tradition," Sister Bernadette said. "Then out with it." "Sir, every November for the past 70 years, the school has been sent a gracious poinsettias for the entire staff and all of the patients and residents. They were delivered roughly about the same time every year. It's part of the hospital's tradition. I am under the understanding that there is actively a private fund as well for this purpose. The Poinsettia Fund?" "I'm well aware of this fund, Sister Bernadette. Lord McIntyre's family created that fund 70 years ago. What is your point?" "We've not received our poinsettias. The resident children are so cheered up by these pretty flowers." Lord McCairn cleared his throat to speak. "Sister Bernadette, are you aware that the hospital's finances are atrocious? It's taking everything we have to try and keep the establishment afloat so that those children have a hospital and home to go to. And you are selfish enough to whine about some flowers? It's not that, she insisted. A lot of the patients there are children who are separated from their parents who cannot afford to relocate here. So they only get to see each other on occasions. And the residents are children who have either been abandoned or have lost their families. The poinsettias are a symbol of hope for them. The thought of someone setting aside a fund for complete strangers, importing very elegant flowers from overseas for every single last one of them, it means the world to them. It makes them believe that someone out there loves them and cares about them. The poinsettias are horribly expensive, Lord McCarran argued, and the hospital has a large pit of debt. You should get your priorities straight. In 1827, the hospital may have been wealthy and full of hope. But it's not 1827. It's 1897, and your funds are dwindling, and you depend on wealthy people like Lord McIntyre, Mr. McLaughlin, the other board members, and myself to keep it alive. What good will poinsettias do if the hospital cannot afford to operate? It's such a small token. No, it's not, Lord McCarran spat at her, his mustache crinkling beneath his nose. There will be no poinsettias this year, Sister Bernadette. This year's poinsettia money was used at my discretion towards the debt that are so duly owed. Have the staff build a greenhouse and grow your own cheaper flowers. Or learn to find your priorities and tell those children that they cannot have pointless flowers, because medicine and food are more valuable in their lives. Many of those children will die without those things. They will live just fine without the flowers. You used our fund? She gasped. You should be grateful, Lord McCarran said. That money bought enough food and medicine to take care of your children. Now be gone so we can attend to real business, and away with such nonsense. You heartless coot! All of you! Sister Bernadette spat. Take it up with someone of a higher authority, then, Lord McCarran smirked. I'm sure God has had enough of your nagging and whining, too, Bride of Christ. Oh, I will take it higher, she declared. You should all pray for forgiveness for such coldness. Get out of here, you old bat, from another random member. Fine! But you've not heard the last of me, she said, turning and marching from the room. She's not kidding, Mr. McLaughlin sighed. I'll be hearing that horrible witch's voice in my sleep now. Sir, from Mr. Borders, it's not really God that worries me. I consider that an empty threat. But she may very well go to Lord McIntyre for this. So let her, Mr. McLaughlin replied. He's so self-absorbed to even care about his own trustees. The only reason he continues this poinsettia fund is because of family tradition. It's good public relations, and it makes him look good. He's no more concerned about those snot-nosed brats than any of us. He's just more cold and heartless. That he'd actually say so. Gavin stopped in the middle of his walk, leaning on a lamppost, and lifted his boot, putting out a cigarette and placing it in a trash can. He leaned back against the post and sighed out the smoke, staring at the bitter, dark sky. There were no stars out tonight. Just an emptiness, so much like the inside of his heart right now. Master! Master! Oh, heavens, no, Gavin sighed. Not now. Up the road came running Angus, his kilt being blown by the breeze and the speed of which he ran. Gavin only gave a side glance, not truly acknowledging him nor expressing anything. His face was blank and empty and miserable. Angus knew he was noticed. Those green eyes were glancing at him, ever so cunningly, yes, he knew. Master, how was it? You came rushing from the house just to ask me such a stupid question. Haven't you anything more productive to do? I already polished your boots, Master. Well, except for those ones, of course. He pointed to the boots on Gavin's feet. So you came all the way out here to polish my boots? You didn't even bring the champagne, did you? Angus blinked. You let me polish your boots out here? Gavin brought a hand to his face. Oh, for heaven's sake, Angus, what do you want? He grew a little deflated. Angus's eyes drooped like sad puppy eyes. Gavin could see the features in him. He sighed. Forgive me. I am still rather in an ill mood. You're always at me, master, Angus pouted. The trip to India was supposed to ease that. Didn't Tristan treat you well? I would have thought another vampire would have been good company. India was fine. Tristan was a very generous host. So you're fine until you return to Scotland. Ever think of relocating? Oh, don't be stupid, Gavin retorted. I can never leave my beloved here. Beloved being? McIntyre Castle? Clementine? Caradwyn? You're so free with that tongue of yours, I may have to cut it off. Aye, very free. But I'd like to keep it a while. I can get all those hard-to-reach places. Vulgar cur. Angus skipped about, thinking an idiotic jig would bring a smile to his master. Cheer up. Things will pick up soon. You need a hobby. Aye, that's it, a hobby. Shall I find you some fresh young maidens? Perhaps some virgin flesh would be appealing to you. Gavin glanced at him. Do not confuse me with you. Orgies are not my thing and never have been. No orgy, Angus whimpered. But you have been a lonely man for many years. I would think bringing young virgin lass into your bed will make you feel strong and needed. Wouldn't that feel good to be in that kind of control? To have a young, fresh lass tremble beneath you? Gavin turned away, trying to hide the stirring he felt. He was not above such things. In fact, he had been notorious for deflowering young virgins in his day. He would bid any woman he found extremely beautiful. He preferred the lower-class beauties, for he had higher standing over them, and they were like wilting flowers, bending to his every whim. But his preference had always been the lovely young virgins, just entering their womanhood, their mid-teens and early 20s. It had been over 70 years since he had successfully bedded a woman. His attempts after the death of his Clementine were never very successful. He'd lose his nerve or grow guilty. However, perhaps a good romp in the bed was what he needed. Perhaps someone low enough to not be missed? No, he couldn't be that cruel. Still, the fact that the words had created such a stir in him, and a hunger, a thirst within him, it was apparent he would need to feed again. In India, he had an ample opportunity to feed. His host had been very generous with the human livestock he kept. He hadn't eaten in several days now. Angus, find me the best of the best. Find me the purest. Aye, my lord, Angus said, saluting. He turned his nose to the air and began to sniff. I shall find you the purest of virgins. I'll find you the purest, the youngest. I shall find her, the last that has barely finished her first moon blood. Hold it, Gavin said in a hiss, tensing as he narrowed his eyes down the road. What is it, master? Someone is coming. Angus sniffed again. Ugh, yes, that old biddy from the hospital. What was her name? Sister Bernadette? Gavin stood tall, preparing to face the nun that was coming in the direction of his mansion. Focusing his senses, he heard her muttering to herself, heard her heavy, angry footsteps, could smell the old breath from her lips, could see the white of her habit, the outline of her form through the darkness. On she marched towards them. Angus prepared himself to follow any order Gavin would be set to give him, be it to kill or not. When she came upon him, she stopped with a gasp, shocked to see him out in this cold night. More so, she was shocked he was not wearing a coat. Lord McIntyre! You are just the man I was coming to see. What business do you have with me, sister? Gavin asked calmly. At this time of night, this is no place for the likes of you. God will look after me. But what about you? His eyes went wide. She couldn't know. Nobody knew. He narrowed his eyes at her again, looking rather superior. I'm afraid I do not know what you mean. You're a heartless fool. Those children depended on you, and you've let them down to create a pretty bottom line. What happened to good old-fashioned charity and goodwill? Especially at this time of year. These children need all the hope and love they can get. I'm afraid I still don't understand, sister. He glanced up at the sky as the wind picked up a little. Oh, such bitter cold. If you wish to speak of this matter like adults, then let us retire to my place. It's too cold out here for a woman like you. He peered over his shoulder. Angus? Aye, my lord? Rush home ahead of us and prepare some water for hot tea. Bring out some butter cookies to nibble on as well. Sister Bernadette had to march quite a ways to get here. I'm sure she's about frostbitten. Aye, Angus agreed, sauntering off towards the mansion. Gavin turned away, offering his arm. Come now, sister. Let's go. She hesitated, unsure of what he was up to. Still, it did no good to stand in this snow and freeze to death, so she took hold of his arm. I don't get you. Almost nobody does, he replied quietly.